All right, Philip, how many Marxist Leninists does it take to change a light bulb?
Uh, how many?
Five. One to replace the old light bulb with an exact copy, one to hang a red lampshade, two to police the whole operation, and one general secretary of light bulb modifications.
Well, I think we've successfully ostracized some portion of whatever audience we've accrued to this point. So
Uh,
that's good. Great
uh,
start.
I mean,
Look, if you're a Marxist Leninist and you don't think that that joke was funny, you're the reason that people don't like Marxist Leninists, okay? So like you need to have a sense of humor, okay, about your own political subculture, okay?
I'm
Look,
already
we
against the
Tommy will
wall.
laugh Tommy will laugh at anarchist jokes, okay? And I'll laugh at like jokes that about leftists that don't know what the fuck they are. So
How many social democrats does it take to change a light bulb?
I don't know how many.
None. They just sit around talking about whether to change the light bulb or to ultimately they just agree to compromise with the darkness.
Oh no. Oh, ow.
There we go. I
See, I can
everybody.
laugh. I don't even know if that label applies to me, to be perfectly honest, but
I
like
hope
there
I
it
don't
is.
think
It
it
was
does. I
funny.
don't think it does.
I honestly don't know, and I honestly do not care to find it anymore. I gave up on that a while ago. Still, we're not here to talk about political labels.
Yeah. So I am Tom and this is Philip. And we are leftists who talk about parenting, and this is Raise 'em Left.
Yeah.
This episode, you know what we're not going to do, Philip? What we're not going to
Uh,
do for the audience?
what aren't we going to do?
Well, we're not going to swaddle them. We haven't. We made fun of half of them, and
Yeah.
that was a bad. That was my own joke, and it was
Yeah.
bad, and it
Yeah.
should be.
We're not gonna swallow you because you're tough real men, and that's a thing that we care about because we're men, and being real men is a real thing that we definitely didn't do a whole podcast out about and then stop doing it because we realized that concept was incoherent.
Yes, yes. I have a giant pirate ship behind me because of my very well formed sense of masculinity. So swaddling.
Right.
Swaddling is
Similar to coddling, right?
that's oh boy, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. Actually, we're gonna weirdly go in the opposite direction before we get there, but so let's see, dive into the what is swaddling, because some of you who aren't parents, or maybe even some of you who are parents, are going to come into this wondering like what exactly this term means. So swaddling is a method of wrapping a baby in a swaddle, um, relatively tightly so that arm movement is restricted. And the idea of this is it prevents the baby from waking itself with the Moro reflex, which is the Moro reflex is where like babies like kind of it's part of like the startle reflex, like that thing you get when you like you're when you fall asleep or when you're trying to fall asleep and then you have a sense of
Oh.
falling. So babies get that a lot, and that's when they and they like throw their arms out and it wakes them up. So the movement of their arms going out wakes them up, right?
So I want to thank you because I did two full ass children and did swaddling because they told me to do it and that it was good, but I had no idea why. And now I finally know. And it makes perfect sense. Why didn't they just explain this?
Yeah, and now that's one of the reasons. Now there is another reason, which is that also by restraining the arms, it makes it a little harder for them to roll over onto their side or onto their stomach. So it keeps them on their back, which prevents SIDS and prevents babies from suffocating. It's important to always keep them on their back. So those are the two reasons why now we swaddle, and why generally looking at most of historical records people swaddle babies. Swaddling is an old ass practice. There is a number of anthropologists who believe that swaddling goes all the way back to the Paleolithic era. We see Jesus is in the Bible, it says that Jesus was in a swaddle. We see this is actually some of this is something I have some a little bit of quibble with because we argue that it was in like a universal practice in like ancient peoples because we see a lot of artwork where in medieval artwork and then also ancient artwork and carvings and stuff where babies are in swaddles. I This is one of those things where I think that some anthropologists and scientists get a little off touch with how humans work. My first thought as an artist is, well, yeah, it's way the fuck easier to draw a baby
Yeah.
in a swaddle than it is to draw a bunch of tiny little fingers and toes. Like,
Yeah. And if you do that wrong, people are like, what the fuck is that person holding? It looks like some kind of weird like monk. Oh, it's a child.
so
Whereas
if
you put
you,
it in a swaddle and people are like, oh, a human baby.
yes, so I think there's an element of that, but we do definitively see it going all the way back and written in, well, in creative history of humans, right? So it is
Yeah.
a very old practice. Whether it was universal at those times is
Yeah. It at
something
least
we
had to be
wouldn't
common
argue.
enough that the artists way back then would think, oh, if I draw it like this, people will recognize it's a baby. So like
Exactly.
it had to have been at least a common practice.
Yes. And so we see a change happen in swaddling. A lot of this episode is going to be some history. So strap in. I like talking about history.
Hey, it's
S-
important.
so
It's
we see it.
important to the dialectic. See, I got there first.
Ah, So, swaddling changed in the Tudor times. Like a lot of things changed once, like the Tudors or Victorians or Western wealthy owning class people got a hold of things and then did bastardized terrible things to it. So it changed at that time and it became seen as something more for the purpose of preventing physical deformity. So you see a change in swaddling in the Tudor era where they were intentionally swaddling babies extremely tightly and through their whole body. And the idea was that if you forced all of their limbs to be straight from birth, then they couldn't grow not straight. And that's not how that works. Um,
I swear it's always the Victorian era that has like the weirdest sciency type stuff, like the stuff that like has the thinnest veneer of scientific like thought behind it, but like always ends in this like weird Frankenstein like conclusion of like, oh, if we just like cobble some parts from dead people together and give it a good electric shock, it'll turn into a person. And you're like, no, stop.
it's almost like people in the Tudor times in this one and in the Victorian times. It's almost like these were people who were living in overcrowded environments with poor sewage control, lead in everything, and just inundated with heavy metals and things that affect your brain development.
That's true, but also there's always this like element to it that feels like slightly like that has like this like deep conservative bent to it. Like, okay, well, like it's really important no matter what that we got to prevent physical deformities. Okay, that's the real thing that's plaguing society right now. I've seen a few too many people at the local circus who didn't die from being abused, and now I had to see them, and so we gotta go ahead and make sure that babies never bend their arms.
And there's an argument to be made of some of this in the Tudor times. You're looking at a lot of Habsburgs and a lot of like the lines of royalty at this point were so heavily inbred that they were having a massive amount of physical deformities. And it's important to note that when we're talking about that kind of a thing, like average people weren't royalty, obviously, but the things that got put into historical record and were considered like like medicine and science were often the things that related to royals because they got treated first. So there's an argument that some of this intense concern about preventing physical deformities was dealing with royal children who were horrifyingly inbred and trying to find obviously that's not the problem, so how do you prevent these physical deformities, which regular ass people aren't having this problem because they're not the Habsburg line. So there's some like all of that is happening, this tight binding, and it starts causing physical deformities, as you would expect. If you bind a baby too tightly in the hips, it causes hip dysplasia and a number of all kinds of problems. Infant mortality, it was causing problems. So swaddling starts to fall out of Western favor as we enter the 17th century.
Yeah. Turns out they were doing it wrong.
Exactly.
Because they were doing it for a stupid reason.
And white Westerners are not going to view it as, oh, we were doing it wrong. No, instead, they take the opposite direction. They say, man, I've been noticing, though, that also, these Native Americans in the Americas, they swaddle their babies. The African indigenous people in Africa, they swaddle their babies. Indigenous and primitive people swaddle their babies. Maybe the problem is the swaddling, and we need to stop doing that because
They,
it's an antiquated
they don't have all those
practice.
physical deformities that we're worried about so much, but like I'm sure that has nothing to do with it. It's a completely separate thing. The fact that they're swaddling like means that we shouldn't be because they represent everything that's definitely wrong.
Yeah, so
White
you
people in the 17th and 18th century are I mean not perfect in the 21st either, but oh boy.
yeah, yeah, and so yeah, during the 17th century, it gets becomes associated with neglect, and they, yeah, like I said, they notice that it's having a negative effect on physical deformities, and they associate it with Native and Indigenous people. Moving into the 18th century, philosophers and physicians are like really become very united on this subject, and now I'm going to make a big long quote from Jean Jacques John Jacques. I am
Jacques,
not.
I think.
Yeah, this is apparently a person other people know of. Is my wife immediately pronounced this correctly? Was like, yes, that is a person. Uh,
Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
yes. Um, in his book Emily, or On Education, in 1762. The child has hardly left the mother's womb. It has hardly begun to move and stretch its limbs when it is given new bonds. It is wrapped in swaddling bands, laid down its head with its head fixed, its legs stretched out, and its arms by its side. It is wound round with linen and bandages of all sort, so that it cannot move. Whence comes this unreasonable custom? From an unnatural practice, since mothers despise their primary duty and do not wish to nurse their own children, they have had to entrust them to mercenary women. These women thus become mothers to a stranger's children, who by nature mean so little to them that they seek only to spare themselves trouble. A child unswaddled would need constant watching. Well swaddled, it is cast into a corner and its cries are ignored. It is claimed that infants left free would assume faulty positions and make movements which might injure the proper development of their limbs. This is one of the vain rationalizations of our false wisdom, which experience has never confirmed. Out of the multitude of children who grow up with the full use of their limbs, among nations wiser than ourselves, you never find one who hurts himself or maims himself. Their movements are too feeble to be dangerous, and when they assume an injurious position, pain warns them to change it.
Yeah, babies famous for having full agency of their body and ability to change circumstances that cause them pain.
That's, there's so much fucking bullshit to unpack in
Oh
this.
man, we could probably do a whole episode just like debunking this one quote. I see the term mercenary women here, which like okay, hold on. I want him to justify calling this like having your child nursed by someone else mercenary women in the same from the same culture that has fucking wet nurses. Like that, what's different?
And so that a lot of people understand, this is 1763. At this time, when we're talking about wet nurses at this time, among like white people, having a wet nurse was typically an enslaved woman whose child was taken from her so that she would continue to produce milk and not feed it to her baby, and instead that milk would be given to the white baby.
Yeah.
And you are disparaging this woman, calling her a mercenary woman, while also disparaging your own wife by saying that, like, well, none of this would even be necessary if could be bothered to want to raise her own child. Like,
And let's be perfectly honest here. Like, the whole practice of wet nursing and all that stuff to begin with is is at its root a type of mutual aid, because the reality underlying this is, and I know because multiple, not my wife in particular, but multiple women that I know of, uh, did not produce or insufficiently produced breast milk, and then some women overproduce it. Well, we got this problem, and we need all the babies fed at a time where they don't have formula and they don't have some other thing, and so you see people doing this to cover for that, because the alternative is to like give them like cow's milk or something even worse, uh, just to make them stop crying about it. And uh, like it's just infuriating to me that uh, this person, with all the veneer and arrogance of like settled science, just like completely trashing all these people for like totally reasonable practices, just so that they can feel like they're better than black people or whatever, because they
yeah,
do something different.
yeah, and also you see kind of like hidden into this, where you also like wrapped up into all of the racism of that time was also this element of mythologizing, like the kind of racism that is mythologizing, where he mentions of like multiple multitudes of children who grew up with the in nations wiser than ourselves, like you know actively being like and did like these groups of people do this and they're primitive, but there's some other people who don't do this, and I bet they are just like
And you just want to like grab them by the shoulders and be like, "You're the one with the physical deformities problem, my dude." Like,
there's a recent episode of Behind the Bastards, a podcast I enjoy that you should never listen to. You should just listen to this podcast. And in it, like they talk about Helena Blavatsky, who was this like a spiritualist that existed in the late 1890s into the early 1900s, and who like set all of the groundwork for Nazi style fascism. And one of the frameworks that so she invented, well, she and some people before her invented this concept of Aryans, and the idea that Aryans were like once a magical people who were then like had their magic robbed from them by Jews, and now like indigenous people, like, so like a thing that I think a lot of people don't know is that Hitler kind of idolized Native Americans. He thought they were like magical people still attached to the magic that he wanted to give to Aryans. And that's when I say of like what I mean by like all of this is like a weird woven fabric of racism that exists at that time and at all time, where both looking at like being like, oh, the Jews took our magic, but also the Native Americans are closer to magic than us, but also, man, the Americans did some cool stuff with concentration camps with the Native Americans, is a wild convergence of thoughts that happens time and time again among fascists and conservatives.
oh man, there's a joke somewhere in there about being able to cast fireball, but I can't find it in a way that's not deeply offensive to anyone who doesn't have a very edgy sense of humor. So I'm gonna pass on that one, but I'll leave it as an exercise to the listener.
No, let's not, no.
So setting all that aside, obviously this guy is like completely shitting all over the practice of swaddling, but this guy's wrong, because we're here in the enlightened era of the year of our Lord 2022, and people are swaddling again. So how do we get there?
Well, it's funny you say that, because from the Enlightenment until today, swaddling wasn't recognized as a best
Yeah,
practice in the Western.
that was intentional irony. Okay, so
um, but yeah, no, today it has made a comeback, and an argued comeback. Like, so I find it interesting to me that it is an argued comeback, as most parents, modern parents I know, have done some element of swaddling or have at least like experimented with it to see if it worked with their kid. But yeah, I was finding a lot of like, medical discussions that were saying, well, it's just some parents do it and it still is mostly like, uh, you know, parents of color that do it. And I just disagree with that. But it is very much making a comeback, and we see pretty strong data supporting it. But I want to talk about some of the data that doesn't support it. So we do see some studies that argue that swaddling increases SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. However, it increases those rates in these studies if the babies are swaddled and then placed on their sides or belly, which, if you remember what we were talking about all the way in the beginning of this episode, the whole point of swaddling, well, a point of swaddling is to keep them from moving so that they don't end up on their side or belly. And this is the thing that just really irks me because this really keeps popping up in a number of studies that are like against the idea of swaddling. And I feel like it would be like saying putting oil in your car is a bad idea because what if you put it in the gas tank instead of in like where your oil goes? And it's like
It looks a
just
lot like gas.
just don't
You
do
might get
that.
confused.
Just don't do that. Like using a hammer is a bad idea because what if you use it on your kneecap instead of a nail? You don't. It's not what you were supposed to do.
Yeah. So like I have a question. Like you could suggest a good thing to do, but what if I did it wrong and it was actually really harmful? I couldn't even finish. God damn it.
And I mean,
Like
this is where I get so frustrated with psychology and academia as a generality, is like some of this. Now, I will say,
oh,
uh,
this really strikes me as like the kind of study that gets published because like the desperate need to publish a positive result as
mm-hmm,
opposed to like just like a replication study.
mm-hmm,
Um,
the replication crisis and generating bullshit like this. Because yeah, exactly that. You need things with positive results. What did it do that is positive? What did it do that like we can throw this on a headline on the news and get some traction that'll get us some funding? Like,
yeah, get that pop science cred.
so recommendations are again that swaddled babies, all newborn babies, should be placed on their back. We have a bunch of other studies that have been done that show that when the baby is placed on its back while being swaddled, there is a huge drop in suffocation and sudden infant death syndrome. So yeah, the only like thing that is accurate in some of the arguments against swaddling is there is data that shows that tight swaddling below the waist can cause hip dysplasia. So if you are swaddling babies, you should leave it a little loose around the hips.
But
Um,
Tommy, what if I'm a Tudor era Victorian who is really worried about physical deformities?
well, first of all, you shouldn't have had kids with your first cousin.
What's the problem with that?
I mean, yeah, and this is again like one of those things that like I mean, well, now, actually, no. I'll say today, no, this is good advice. Yeah, I know, tell people, like, I maybe, because, like, the first way, and I think this is really important. Like, they haven't told me this in any of my parenting classes that it's important to keep it loose around the waist for that reason or any reason. They haven't said that at all. It was, I just get, like, wrap the baby up tight, make it like a burrito. Like, I look, I worked at Taco Bell for a lot of years. You tell me to wrap a baby up like a burrito, that baby's gonna be wrapped. Uh,
Really? Because every time I get a taco from Taco Bell, like now I'm imagining babies that are wrapped that are just like
well,
done. We did it. We did a swaddle. It looks just like the soft taco I got from Taco Bell last night. They folded it in half.
Well, I'll say that I'm assuming that after a good hearty meal, the swaddled baby is definitely going to look like a blown out burrito. But which
Well, it'll
actually,
definitely look like a blown out burrito in some way at some point, but maybe not because of the swaddling.
and I mean that was like another one of the things, like going back to the like 17th, 18th century guys who were complaining about swaddling. They're all also complaining about like, well, if you swaddle a baby and then you don't change it, then it it causes problems for the baby. And I'm like, yeah, change it. I don't know what to tell you here. I mean,
It's just another, like, I swear 17th, like this era of science is just like it feels like the process of having a stroke. Like you're just like, what? No, like stop. Why are what is wrong with you?
yeah. So, all of our evidence says the swaddling is a good thing to do. It is a positive thing to do. It's a thing you should definitely do with your kids. And now, so here's the thing that I kind of want to talk about in like the general philosophies of parenting. This is the first one of the ones that I really ran into that is an old practice. This is, definitively, inarguably an old practice. And it's one that I very much like. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm excited to try this one out. I think it's a good idea, but not because it's an old practice, because it has data behind it that it says that it makes sense. And the old practice element of it does, in some way, check into it of like, yeah, no, people who have raised babies for generations have, people who have had 14 fucking kids probably had some kind of good idea, like eventually developed some smart ideas on how to keep a baby from crying in the middle of the night so that they could get more sleep. And I like that. But we also have to, of course, be careful because like traditionalism is a like what's the word for like bad like when we talk about using straw man analogies, right? Um, there's a list of the things like straw man analogies, and like ode to traditionalism is one of them. I can't think of the word I'm trying to say there.
Oh yeah, the appeal to tradition is the, if you're
Yes.
looking for the name of the fallacy, yeah.
Yes, logical fallacies. Yes, so it can be an appeal to tradition, and I think it's one of those things that for a lot of new parents, you kind of get like bombarded with these. Like I know the grandparents have been like, here's all, don't try to reinvent the wheel is the thing I've been told many times. Like, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Look at what, older folks did, do the same things we did. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm going to want to do that, but I'm also going to want to look at it fresh eyes. And I think there is a nuance and a balance that is healthy to have there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there's often some like there's often some value in wisdom built into especially practices that have been going on for a really long time. It's something that I wish I had looked into more when I wasn't uh deeply tired and exhausted parents, is like, and maybe we should do an episode on this, the practice of co-sleeping, because I know that's like very common in some other cultures, but it's like very highly not recommended. um and I've always wondered, like, you know is there a similar history here? Like, are we on a trend away from that and like into that, or is that like actually bad and we should, I have no idea, genuinely. They said it was bad, we shouldn't do it, so we didn't. um but there were certainly times that it kind of felt like it would have been easier, if that were possible. But um,
yeah,
I'm
and I mean,
also a very, very active sleeper, so it's kind of like an easy decision for me. Like, I move around a ton, and I was like, if we put the baby in the bed, I'm 100% going to elbow that baby in the face, like in my sleep. So,
yeah, and that's a topic that I feel like I've gotten some mixed messaging on. Like, we've been told, yeah, definitely do not have the baby sleep with you. If you are falling asleep, think you're falling asleep, put the baby in the bassinet.
mm,
But at the same time, like I was reading through what to expect when you're expecting the first year and above or whatever, and like in it, they talk about like, well, it's perfectly normal during breastfeeding because both you and the baby are getting like relaxing hormones and stuff that you might nod off, and that's okay. Go ahead, nod off. And when the baby's done, it'll wake you up and put the baby away. And I'm like, that's almost the opposite advice that I just got elsewhere. And it's like not, but at the same time, and in the same book, it's like, do not do co-sleeping. But if you're breastfeeding and you nod off, it's okay. And I'm like, huh, it feels like conflicting advice in some ways,
oh, I
but
see.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think they're imagining maybe a separate context, like you're breastfeeding, like you're sitting up and maybe like you're in a comfy chair and you like nod off, and then you kind of like stir, and like I know my mom described moments like this when I was a kid. Like she would be feeding me and I would like she would, uh, my mom was not good at waking up. Self-admitted. Not this is not from my personal experience. I don't remember this. But my mom told me that, she'd never been great at waking up, and she would be extremely boring. She would like get me and like just sort of like put me in feeding position. She'd end up like falling asleep, and then she'd like kind of like stir at some point and be like, oh yeah, okay, move him on the other side, do that, and then like wake up a little bit later, like, okay, back to bed. Like very uninteresting. So I ended up sleeping through the night fairly early on, because when my mom uh, picked me up, it wasn't very fun. It was I got to eat, but
Yeah.
um, anyway, yeah,
So I'm curious, kind of personal experiences, because I haven't had any yet. I'm just in the gear up, reading all of the things, getting ready to have a baby in the house, and probably by the time this episode airs, I'll have a baby in the house and be frantically trying to deal with that. But
yeah, yeah.
did y'all swaddle? Like, how did that work
Yeah,
for
so now
y'all?
that we've successfully established that swaddling is definitely the right thing to do, is recommended by all things, and if you're against it, you're a bad person. Did we do it? Um,
Sorry, maybe I should have put this at the beginning.
yeah, no. Instead, it would be better if you did it at the start, so that it's a trap. So that if I said no, I would then look like an idiot. Um,
nobody is a
no,
nobody is a bad person for their parenting
no, no, no,
decisions.
no, no. I know, I know,
Well,
no. I,
within reason.
I mostly, I just, uh, I enjoyed the fact that the fact that we had planned to talk about like my personal experience here, as no matter where you put it, it's a trap one way or the other. If my answer was no, but fortunately my answer is yes, so it doesn't matter. Um, yes, we did, and I even think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. We swaddled both of our kids. Um, it obviously I'm not going to be able to give like a very meaningful like anecdote as far as like was it helpful or not. Like the like a my memory's fuzzy. It was quite a while ago for me, and then like b my just general impression of that whole thing is like, well, there's like a million variables that you're all questioning all of them all at once. Anytime anything remotely goes wrong. Uh, but yeah, we swallowed them. They stayed on their backs. So it you know seemed to help with that. Um, I we did it, like I said before, not really knowing why, or at least I didn't know why. Maybe my wife did. But um, it just was like, oh, like I think our understanding was like, oh, they like it. It makes them feel like they're in the womb again or whatever, and it's like it relaxes them or whatever. We're like, okay, sure, whatever. I'm very tired. Um, but yeah, we did. Not from a well-informed position, or not for personally from a well-informed position, but uh, just on the recommendation of people who you know were supposed to know more than us at least, and I think they did in this particular case at least. Um, and so yeah, no, it didn't have any negative effects as far as I know in my own personal experience. Like it didn't, we didn't have any particular like um, negative reactions. They didn't like get upset when we did it or whatever. It often did, and sort of like calm them down once they. I think like my own report of the situation would have been, um, it took me um, a while to like fully remember like exactly how to do it in the good way. Uh, it wasn't to me very intuitive how to get it done, but like also I was tired, and ADHD makes it really hard to remember like perfect patterns, and there wasn't like a way to like generalize it into a principle. So it was just like I just had to memorize like, okay, fold this like this, and then this like this, and this, and like I'm just not good at memorizing stuff. So uh I remember that it took me a while, and so I often had to have Bethany come help me do it because I could never remember how to do it. Um which perhaps then puts a lie to my ADHD excuse, because she also has it, but uh I'll hide behind my neurodivergence, I guess. Like a coward. Uh but um and I remember like the experience of it being a little bit difficult if the baby was feeling particularly wiggly. They would like fight you a little bit, not like intentionally, but they're just like, I want to move around a bunch, and you're like, stop, it's time to go to sleep. uh, but yeah, it was fine. Didn't it wasn't a big didn't it never occurred to me that it was a big deal. I had no idea up until we went and started talking about the idea for this episode that there was ever a period in history where people were like, I don't know about this swaddling thing. That seems sketchy to me. So, and it reeks of all the type of pseudo Victorian science stuff that comes out of that time period.
Yeah, 100%. And then that was one of the reasons why, like, I kind of dove into this topic at first, just out of like, well, curiosity, maybe a little instruction. Like, I know I was wondering, like, why swaddle? And I'm sure a lot of parents wonder, and there's not really often a lot of good advice, or good information given. It's just advice. Just do the swaddle. Trust me, it'll help them sleep. Why? I wanted to dive into that. I was very surprised when I ran into a bunch of white men in the 1700s who had probably never touched even their own babies being like super angry about the idea of swaddling. It was fascinating to me, and I think it says a lot about like a lot of just that thread of angry white men through history and existing today having loud comments about parenting and teaching. And I think there's a lot to be said too in what we've ran into of like there being a validity to the process of parenting that is imperfect. Like, yeah, it's fine that you were just trying to figure it out on the go. That's kind of a normal state of things. There's going to be things like that I'm going to be figuring out on the go. I'm not going to know why. After a year of us doing this podcast, I'm going to be like, oh my God, that's why pacifiers work. Like I know kind of how pacifiers work, but I'm trying to pull examples out of thin air.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's I
I,
think
I
it's yeah.
don't I don't experience a great deal of like personal like self doubt about this in particular. I think you know just as in general, I am always kind of the opinion that like um you know science around this kind of stuff is science and it is valid, but it also has the framing of like the average person or the average baby, which is like not a real baby. Like if there's no baby that is the average baby, and like everyone is off the average in some way. And so whatever way that your baby is off the average, you're going to have to compensate for that, which means you're going to have to ignore some piece of like well established advice on what the best practice is. Uh, so, you know, don't guilt yourself too much on it. Don't just throw it away willy nilly. Of course, like, you want to try to do all the best practice stuff up front and then, kind of adjust from there, but, give yourself permission to adjust. In this particular case, we didn't have any problems with swaddling, so we didn't adjust off of the recommended practice because it was fine.
So I think that concludes this week. Hopefully, this week was maybe a little less spicy than our past 2 weeks. I kind of I went into this hoping for like, oh, let's take a little bit of a breather from that hot topic, and then I found another hot topic without trying to. But
Yeah, I mean, we
still,
still talked about Nazis and concentration camps in
oh
this one,
God, I
so
did. I did. I did. I
yeah.
did.
So maybe I don't know. I guess it depends on what upsets you.
But so Philip, where could people find us to be upset by more things?
Yeah, well, if you were deeply upset by this video and want to be deeply upset some more by other things that we say, or if you had a positive reaction and liked it and want to see more of that kind of thing, you can, if you're watching on YouTube, you can like the video, you can leave a comment, and you can hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. If you're listening to us anywhere, then and you really like this podcast and want to support it and want to help us make more episodes, maybe get better cameras or mics or whatever, uh, you can find us on Patreon and support us financially at patreon.com/raisemleft. And you can find us on social media. We'll have a Facebook. Maybe by the time this episode comes out, we'll have a TikTok and some other things. So yeah, just look for us. We're everywhere. We're Raise 'em Left.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever other time of day it is. Thank you.